1 second, let me get my slides up. Hi, everybody. Good evening. So excited to be here and to be collaborating. My name is Donna Griffit, and I'm a corporate storyteller, which basically means that for the past 17 years, I've roamed the globe, both in person and virtually, helping people not be boring. Working with companies from early stage startups all the way through Fortune 500 and Fortune 100 companies. And even they don't know how to tell stories and give interesting speeches. The main crux of my work is working on investor decks with startups, and that's what I do day in, day out. I get to polish brilliant diamonds. That's another definition of what I do. And today, in the time we have, as we're all getting ready to hear the pitches, I wanted to share some of the secrets of my trade with you. So I'm going to go ahead and hopefully I have the right. So this is the story of a startup that I worked with many years ago, probably 10, 11. And it was a startup called Eat With. I don't know if you all have heard of it, but they were a lovely company that basically turned home kitchens into Airbnbs for food. They were acquired in 2017 by a European company. And I worked with the founders really early on. And they, of course, were talking about the CAC and the LTV and the specs and the bits and the bytes and the bobs. And it was just going over my head. And I said, guys, how did you come up with the idea for this? And the founder, his eyes lit up. He said, on my honeymoon. He said, we were in Greece and we were walking around looking for authentic local food. And all we kept seeing was souvlaki, souvlaki, souvlaki. You know, those signs with the blue and the little pictures of all the very touristy things.
I'm sure Anna knows a lot about this in Toronto.
Yeah, so everywhere, every tourist city you go to. Yes, we do. And finally, he said, we stopped a little old woman that was walking, you know, with her little grocery bags and said, excuse me, ma'am, where do the locals eat? What do you mean, where do we eat? We eat at home. And he said, well, how do I get a reservation for that restaurant? And she said, oh, you want to come to my house for dinner? And he said, no, that's not what I meant. She said, oh, please come. I'd love to have you. So she gave him the address, said to show up. He said he and his new wife showed up to dinner, and it was brilliant. There were 10 people around the table, gorgeous food, wonderful conversation. It was the highlight of their honeymoon. He said, and I wanted every single person I knew and didn't know to have that kind of experience of experiencing the local flavor. And that's how Eat With was born. Now, I don't remember their CAC. I don't remember their LTV. I don't remember their go-to-market strategies, but I do remember that story over a decade later. And that is the beauty of storytelling. People are not going to remember your bits and your bytes and your numbers, but they are going to remember the story of how you got where you're going and why it matters. And that's the power of storytelling. Now, kids love stories. This is my oldest. She's now 8. When she was 2, she would surround herself with books and read. Her little sister now does the same. Today, I took her to the library for the first time since COVID, and she came out with a stack of books like this. From the time we can function, we're drawn to stories. Kids can listen to the same stories again and again. They take it in, they learn to communicate, they learn to have conversations in their head thanks to stories. Storytelling is age old. We're talking tens of thousands of years. The last time our brains got a hardware upgrade was about 52,000 years ago. And it's about that same time that we started seeing cave paintings, which is basically a pre-language story of how our ancestors lived their lives, got by, went about their day-to-day. So storytelling is really survival. And then people would sit around the campfire for years telling stories, not showing PowerPoint presentations. And I'm sure that all of you have a story from your grandparents' home, your parents' home, of something that is so alive to you and so visceral to you that it's so bright that you can almost picture it as if you were there. I can see that street in Greece in a little village with the little woman, even though I wasn't there, because that's how alive the stories are. Stories have a way of connecting us, of resonating with us, of finding a way. There's a part in our brain called the insula that when somebody tells a story, it starts going through the catalog and saying, oh, that reminds me of the time that, and then we have a moment of real connection to the other person because we can identify. And studies have shown that this is such a powerful moment. And you know how sometimes we say, oh, we were so on the same wavelength? That's not lip service, because studies show that brains of the storyteller and the story listener actually sync up in a moment of engrossment. And that's a moment of true influence, which is what we want for sales, which is what we want for fundraising. And that, again, is the power of storytelling. So I didn't get a chance to work with the teams before their pitches, and I'm going to have some notes for you tonight, I'm sure. But I do want to give everyone some of my top tips for your pitches. And it can be sales, it can be investor, or anything else. Now, this child is playing with
Lego.
Lego. Any engineers in the room? Usually they're like, that's not Lego, that's Duplo, because engineers' job is to be bleep detectors and to tell us. So who here played with Lego as a child? Who here has kids or grandkids that play with Legos? Who here has ever stepped on a Lego in the middle of the night and wanted to commit mass murder?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Painful. So in an age of PlayStations and tablets and smartphones, how do you explain that Lego is still one of the most loved toys around the world? What would you guys say?
Flexible, and you can do many.
You could do anything. What else?
It connects everything.
Connects everything.
It has a flow.
So Lego is the creative expression where structure meets flexibility. Sounds like an oxymoron, but think about it. You can build anything. You can create anything you want, but you got to stick to the basic structure. You can't start bending, breaking, and trying to be clever. And it's so simple that even a very young child with very limited motor skills can do it. And that is the structure that I want you to have for any message that you create. Very modular, there's a specific structure, but once you get it, it frees you to be as creative as you want to be with your content. So what is that structure? The first tip of the day is write from your audience's perspective. And if there's only one thing you remember from this entire speech, I would like it to be this. It's not about you. It's not about your technology or your solution or how great it is. It is about the audience listening or the audience of your end users that they are listening about in the case of investors. And that's what we constantly have to keep in mind. So we want to intuit our audience's questions in advance and answer them in advance. You might be thinking, well, how are we going to do that? Lucky for you, people are not terribly creative. So you pretty much get asked the same questions again and again and again, right? Maybe a few different ones here. So what I want you to do when you're sitting down to work on the next version of your pitch deck is write a list of all the questions you've been asked, all the questions you think you might be asked, all the questions you dread being asked. And if you need some help, on my website under resources, I've compiled a list of over 100 investor questions grouped into topics. So you can use that. And then I want you to take that list and group the questions together into 4 groups. And I'll show you what I mean by that in a minute. And then your slides will answer those questions. 1 slide per answer. And then what have you done? Basically, you have created your entire message around their top of mind questions, concerns. And that is how you build trust. So just to show you, I've done the hard work for you. And the 2 main presentations that I want to talk about today, one will be the sales / persuasion / marketing pitch. It doesn't have to be proper sales. It can also be a partnership. It could be anything where you need to convince people. So some of you might be saying, oh, the problem solution again, that's so old. Yeah, it is old. It's thousands of years old. That's exactly what I mean by it. And there's a reason it's been around for thousands of years. That's how our brains take in information and learn. It was there with Greek tragedies. It was there with Shakespeare, Molière, Chekhov, even the Bible. That's how stories are written. There are only about 8 types of movie scripts that get written again and again and again and again. But the twists and the characters and the colors are why we keep going to the movies when the theaters are actually open. So we start off with the need, or the opportunity, the challenge, our proposed solution, the demo there, then some business data and our vision for the future, and finally, some kind of summary of your value props or your USPs, your unique selling points. And if you take a look at my structure for the investor pitch, very, very similar, only this time it has to be much more about what the investors and the ROI and how the business is going to work and your deep understanding of your end user and your audience. And I like to end with a slide called Key Investment Merits, or why us, why now? So that's my Lego set. Now, this can be expanded or contracted. This can be 5 minutes and you just shrink it down with a little less information in each section, or it can be an hour long if you need it to be, and then you add information. Usually my rule of thumb is for an investor deck, you should be able to go through it in about 10 minutes if they didn't stop you for questions. And believe me, if they stop you for questions, that's a good thing because it means they're interested in hearing more or seeing how you'll respond. A few more things. So question, what do you guys think is the #1 ingredient that makes an action film, a suspense thriller that must be there? Otherwise, it's just like a sappy drama. What do you think has to be there?
Expectation.
The what?
Expectation, maybe?
Expectation. Who creates that sense of expectation?
I don't know.
Anyone else?
Perhaps.
Characters,
Which character?
the protagonist,
I'm gonna one up you know. It's actually
The
antagonist.
hero. You need the hero.
The antagonist.
Well,
The
actually,
antagonist.
no hero is a hero without a good villain.
Yes.
So imagine that instead of hearing, Luke, I love your father. Kind of sound like that with masks, right? Or instead of hearing Luke, all that, you would hear something like, come to Papa, my boy. Or instead of hearing, hello, Clarice, you were to hear, how you doing? Or instead of Jaws, you'd have like a Nemo or a Dory. How big would the suspense be with those villains? So you want to build the suspense by grabbing them with the villain as soon as you possibly can. So you're either going to make your audience feel the pain or go, hallelujah, I can't believe you're doing this. This is the most exciting thing I've seen in years. Both work. It just depends on how you want to spin it, and you want to turn it into a story. So we have a structure of the entire presentation that's based on a story, and then we weave stories in. And this is the perfect place for your origin story, like the Eat With story, the souvlaki story, or for a story that happened to a client of yours in their lives before starting to work with you, or a company at large. Target was hacked once again, and kind of get us understanding, try to make it the not so obvious stories, because then we're going to engage them. They're listening, they're hearing something new. Now, Mark Twain said, never let the truth get in the way of a good story. Now, I don't for 1 minute mean to say lie or use vanity metrics, not at all. But there are ways to shape the story so that it's at its most attractive and not a way that bogs people down. So for example, I was working with a team that was very technical. They kept throwing around words like computer vision and image analysis and deep learning. And I was like, what the heck do y'all do? And then finally, one of the founders said, you know, this one time in Tokyo, and my storytelling antennas went up. I said, you mean you came up with the idea in Tokyo? And they said, no, we already told you we come from a background of computer science and image analysis. And I said, okay, be quiet. You came up with the idea in Tokyo, okay? And they kind of looked at me funny like engineers do. And then they got it. Because doesn't it sound sexier to say something like, I was roaming the streets of Tokyo, feeling lost in translation, looking at all these beautiful buildings, having no clue what I was looking at. And I thought, how cool would it be if I could just snap a picture and right away my phone would tell me what it is I was looking at, what's around, where I could get a bite to eat, where there's a sale. And then we thought, well, with our background in computer vision and image analysis, why can't we create that? And today it's an AR, VR play embedded into cars. You drive through a city and it's like pop-up video. So do you think the investors asked to see their passport to see when they were in Tokyo and when they registered their company? Not likely, but it resonates. How many of you have gone to a country where you didn't read the language and looked around feeling a bit lost? That's what we want to create, and that's what stories do. Back in 2009, I made this list. These were the biggest pains that startups were solving, the biggest villains that they were the hero of. Bad economy gave birth to the sharing economy. Security vulnerabilities are still around. The last three of this list, the boredom, popularizing cultural trend, missing a great opportunity, those are the carrots. Those are the, let's not miss out on them. We're not, solving world hunger, but at the same time, people like to look at pictures of themselves and their friends dancing in silly videos, and that can make a lot of money too. When COVID hit last March, I thought, what are going to be the big villains that people will be fighting during this year? And these were my guesses, and I think that it was pretty spot on. And we've seen a lot of other heroes emerge, and I think e-com is way up there as well. But think about the logistics. We didn't have freaking toilet paper for the first few months of the pandemic. Somebody's got to do something in that supply chain to make sure that doesn't happen again. Digital health, who wanted to go to a doctor's office unless you absolutely have to? Remote work, collaboration, money saving. So these are the big winners. So what I always say to startups is, if you can show your relevance now and why you solve the urgent, pressing problems of the world, there's a lot of money to be had. You need to be able to prove that you can. So that's the storytelling piece of the problem and the solution. Like I said, you can take that, you can shrink it down to an elevator pitch. The biggest mistake I hear people make when they only have a minute to pitch is, oh, I only have a minute. Let me talk about myself as much as I can. Wrong answer. Don't miss the moment of engagement, of showing that you get that there's a problem and you understand it. So take the Tokyo story, shrink it down a little bit, turn it into a question, say something simple about your solution, and then a teeny exciting tidbit about the business, and get them to continue the conversation. Third tip, show, don't tell. Steve Jobs could have stood around for an hour talking about the iPad, but the minute he picked it up and we saw it, we got it. Remember that hardware in our brains that we got, the new piece 52,000 years ago? It's called the prefrontal cortex. It's responsible for visuals, both expressing ourselves visually and identifying things. We need to see to believe. So show us the demo. Now, your demo does not have to be some kind of Hollywood produced movie. You want to tell a story of the user journey, preferably from the first time user perspective, because this is probably the first time that the investors are seeing your product and they want to be in awe of the simplicity, the beauty, and the functionality of it. So you can do what I call a deconstructed user story. Start off in your problem statement with a day in the life, the miserable life of one of your clients before they started working with you. And then you can come back now, let's see how we solved it. This was the onboarding, this was the implementation, these are a few features. And then the results, 37% increase in productivity, 87% reduction in costs, no downtime. And then a testimonial saying, oh my God, we love these people. We cannot imagine going back to the old way. Stickiness, stickiness, stickiness. Proving that somebody is willing to put money on you. Okay? That's how you do a good demo. Don't overdo it with the features. Okay, this is my silver bullet. This is my deepest, darkest secret ingredient that I am telling you all now for in the pitch decks that I write. The opportunity. It's not just about how big your market is, but going back to showing your relevance today, it's showing why now is the time for you. And I usually try to look for 3 different trends. The first one is usually something behavioral. For example, COVID was a catalyst, driving a lot of trends that were already on the rise, like e-commerce, all the way up like that. Showing that there's a demand, showing that there's numbers, proving that you are needed. The second trend oftentimes is something regulatory, a change, a legislation, something that is changing and people will need you. For example, Gdpr. When it was released a few years ago, before, nobody knew what GDPR was, so they didn't understand what the big hullabaloo was until Companies started getting fined billions of dollars for not having a solution in place. And a client of mine that I was working with got acquired after they couldn't raise money for 2 years before. So it's all about showing people this is what's going to happen. We see the writing on the wall. You want to get on this train now. And finally, the last tip of the evening, end with inspiration. Your North Star. Where are you heading with this? What are you going to be when you grow up? Is this the first step in a much bigger vision? Paint a picture of how big this will be. And you must be able to answer that question. And oftentimes founders will say, well, isn't that a bit hubris to start talking about how we're going to do a seismic shift? Yes, it is. And it's what they need to hear. They need to understand that you are well on your way. You're super focused on your current product, but this is something that can go even bigger and make a massive difference. So paint that picture, show them the journey you plan to take them on. And I'll end with a quote, which is also something that's very powerful in a storytelling perspective, because it's somebody else telling the story. So Stuart Butterfield, the founder of Slack, said, if there were one piece of advice I could give to my younger self, concentrate on the storytelling, on convincing people. If you can't do that, it doesn't matter how good the product is. So I hope that I have been able to inspire you to realize the importance and the beauty of storytelling, and that you will find your very own souvlaki story. And wish you lots of luck tonight and with your journey. And I'm here if I can be helpful.